Old school gamers rejoice, for the Giana Sisters are back. My name is David, and this is my Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams review of questionable quality. Back in 1987, everyone who's into gaming was playing Super Mario Bros. At least all those that owned an S. For those that didn't, gaming was limited to whatever home computer you happened to have lying around, be it a Commodore 64, Amiga, an Atari ST, or a staggering number of other platforms. If it wasn't an NES, you weren't playing Mario. Nintendo then, as now, never ported their games to other platforms. If you wanted Mario, you bought a Nintendo console. So, being as it was the era of the bedroom coders, an intrepid company called Time Warp Productions decided to create a Mario clone for all the myriad platforms Nintendo pretended didn't exist. The fruit of this was the Great Giana Sisters. It wasn't the first clone made, and certainly wasn't the last clone game ever made, but it was the most unapologetically blatant one, right down to cloning Super Mario Bros. World 1-1 brick for brick. This did raise Nintendo's ire somewhat, and subsequently saw it being taken off the shelves as the threat of litigation rose its head. I'll admit I've never played it. Back then I was only 3 and I had difficulty completing Dizzy, for crying out loud. And I've never felt the need to play it on an emulator, although maybe I should. Now, 25 years later, we have a new game. This game, Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams. Well, it definitely takes basic cues from the platformers of old. I mean, you stomp on enemies' heads, you jump, spin and glide over the stages to reach the castle at the end. This is, however, a thoroughly modern game. Graphics wise, gameplay wise, design wise, all are a modern twist on old school ideas. The idea of switching between two worlds is the most obvious mechanic in the game. You control Giana, whose sister Maria gets kidnapped by a dragon at the start of the game, through a fairy tale dreamland that can be twisted into a spooky nightmare world at the press of a button. Switching between the worlds causes different effects. Some enemies behave differently, like the knights that charge at you in the light world become skeletons that throw bones at you in the dark world. The multi-eyed alien things in the dark world becomes a stationary box in the light world that, when dead, can double as a springboard. The environment changes too, not just cosmetically, as spike traps appear and disappear, bridges and wells crumble to reveal pits, moving platforms change direction, and even platforms and collectible gems become solid or intangible as you switch. Exploiting these differences is required to complete every level. The game is also balls to the wall difficult, although you'll be excused for not thinking so for the first few levels. The difficulty curve sharply rises as you're introduced to more mechanics and are forced to chain them together in imaginative ways in order to progress, and as more and more accurate timing comes into play later in the game. Indeed, the last 3 levels have yet another large spike in difficulty as the timing of some jumps becomes somewhat frustrating, but the controls are tight enough that every time you do die, it's normally your fault. Sometimes the dash attack goes off in the wrong direction, but that may just be my fat fingers on the gamepad as opposed to anything the game is responsible for. It's certainly a hard game, and it doesn't hide the fact. The instant respawn and quick death animations that minimise downtime between deaths attest to that. It's not on the level of something like Super Meat Boy, although it does come close in terms of sheer frustration at times, but I've yet to rack up more than 40 deaths on a level, and the levels are much larger than any single Super Meat Boy stage. You only get 2 abilities beside the world switching, but both pull triple shifts when it comes to the game's mechanics. The dash attack at its simplest is a double jump that doubles as a semi-homing attack. But it also breaks blocks, acts as a ricocheting wall jump, and activates the yellow launchers that send you flying off in one direction. The spin is again simplest, the double jump with a gliding slow fall. It also allows the activation of certain platforms, and it acts as a flight ability when you glide over fans. Later in the game you get gumball machines that let you hop in a bubble and essentially swim in the air until you pop the bubble, which gives you a slightly unique take on the underwater sections earlier in the game, in that you're now swimming around all of the enemies that you used to be able to attack but now can't, because if you bump into them you pop the bubble and you fall and you die. After each level you're giving a rating. I've yet to get over 3 stars on a single level, and I'm assuming the 4 and 5 stars are for hardcore and uber hardcore respectively, although I could be wrong. You're required to get 3 stars on every level of a world in order to unlock the boss level for that world, and while it's not really difficult to get 3 stars, it is quite easy to get 2 stars on a couple of levels the first time round, and all it does is really artificially lengthen the game. And it is a short game, if you're not into getting the hardcore achievements it is anyway. There are too few bosses in the game, but what there are excellent fun and well thought out, although once you get the boss's pattern down, they're really quite easy to defeat and don't really pull any random surprises on you, although that would really screw up the hardcore mode players anyway. Graphically, it's gorgeous too, although I think some parts do suffer from an overabundance of background objects that look like they're part of the level, and a couple of places where foreground objects obscure enemies and traps until the last seconds, but these are few and far between, even in the short span of the game. The cartoony style works really well though, and you can quite easily see from the footage in the background that everything in the game switches around fluidly when you go from the light world to the dark world. The only problem I've found is that, possibly from having 2 art styles per level, is that level variety suffered. There are only 4 types of level that I can determine: outdoors, castle, mineshaft and snowy, each of which are repeated at least twice throughout the course of the game. Coupled with this, the music is fairly limited too, as I believe there are 2 tracks per stage style. Although each track is awesome in its own right, and I don't begrudge hearing the tracks more than once, purely because they're made of awesome. One is the light and bouncy one for the cute Giana in the spooky world. And one is the heavy metal arrangement for punk Giana in the dream world. And the punk one, the heavy metal one, is done by the Swedish metal band Machine Supremacy, which is awesome in itself and is one of the reasons why the audio track is as good as it is. On the whole, the game's pretty much bug free. There are a few that have made it through the testing process, and there's one in particular that I fell foul of a couple of times, where the spring box doesn't reset its graphics when you die and looks like it should still be a spring box, but in actual fact will skewer you dead. I'd say that would be a bit of a shit for hardcore players, but since it only happens when you die, it'll never affect them. If you liked Super Meat Boy, VVVV or their ilk, I would recommend this to you wholeheartedly. Even if you don't like those kind of games, this one is suitably easier than those, and some joy can still be found in the game by those turned off by Meat Boy's epic face grinding difficulty. It costs £12.99 on Steam in the UK and $15 on GOG.com. Until Tuesday the 30th of November at 5 PM GMT it'll be on sale, and I believe that's £11.69 in the UK, and there's a similar amount off for the US dollars rate. I don't know about euros, I don't actually have access to that, but I assume it will follow the usual 2-tier standard that Steam normally does, in that half of Europe gets it for a stupid price and half of Europe gets it for a decent price. If you really like Super Meat Boy, buy it now. If you're unsure, wait until it goes on sale, and it will, especially because it's on Steam. It is a bit short for my liking, and those who want to do the hardcore mode will get the most out of it. My name is David, this has been a review of questionable quality, and I bid you a happy owl stomping.